I reject you as my Alpha King. The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them, and the entire throne room went dead silent. Every wolf in the hall froze. Every guard's hand moved toward their weapon. And Kael, standing 3 steps above me on the stone platform, stared down at me like I had just signed my own death warrant. His jaw tightened. His eyes flashed gold for just a second, and I knew his wolf was right there under the surface. What did you just say? His voice was low, controlled, and more dangerous than if he had shouted. I felt the pressure of his dominance roll over the room like a wave, and half the wolves in the hall dropped their heads. But I kept my chin up. My legs were shaking, but I didn't move. You heard me, I said, and my voice cracked, but I didn't take it back. 3 years ago, you rejected me as your mate because I was just an omega. You said I wasn't strong enough. You said I'd be a liability. So now I'm rejecting you. The bond between us flared hot and painful in my chest, like something was tearing inside me. I could feel his wolf clawing at the connection, confused and furious. But I didn't care anymore. Kael took a step down toward me, and the room seemed to shrink. He was massive, built like every Alpha King before him, and the crown on his head caught the firelight. You don't get to reject me, he said, and his voice was shaking now too. I am your king. You are my mate. That bond doesn't just disappear because you're angry. He stopped 1 step above me, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off him. Close enough that I could smell the pine and smoke scent that used to make me feel safe. I'm not angry, I said, and I was lying. I was so angry I could barely breathe. I'm done. I reached into the pocket of my cloak and pulled out the silver band he'd given me the night we were supposed to complete the bond. It was simple, plain, nothing like the rings the other high-ranking mates wore. I held it out to him. You didn't want me then. You don't get to claim me now. His hand shot out and closed around my wrist, not taking the ring, just holding me there. His grip was firm but not painful, and for a second I saw something flash across his face that wasn't anger. It looked like panic. Sera, he said, and his voice dropped low, almost pleading. Don't do this. Not here. Not like this. But it was too late. The bond snapped. I felt it break like a rope pulled too tight, and the pain dropped me to my knees. I couldn't breathe. The pain was everywhere, like my chest had been ripped open and everything inside was burning. I heard Kael shout something, felt his hands on my shoulders, but I couldn't focus on anything except the agony tearing through me. Breaking a mate bond wasn't supposed to feel like this. It wasn't supposed to be possible unless both wolves agreed. But I'd done it anyway, and now my body was paying the price. Get the healer, Kael snapped, and I heard footsteps running. His hands were still on me, holding me upright, and I hated that even now, even after everything, his touch made the pain a little less. Sera, look at me. Breathe. His voice was rough, almost desperate, and I forced my eyes open. His face was pale, and there was sweat on his forehead. He was feeling it too. The bond breaking hurt him just as much, but he was an Alpha King. He could handle pain better than I could. Let go of me, I whispered, and I tried to pull away. My wolf was howling inside me, confused and grieving, and I could feel her trying to reach for his wolf. But I shoved her down. I wouldn't let her crawl back to him. Not after what he'd done. Kael didn't let go. Instead, he picked me up like I weighed nothing and carried me out of the throne room. I heard the whispers start immediately, hundreds of voices echoing off the stone walls. They were all talking about me. About what I'd just done. He took me down a side hallway, away from the crowd, and kicked open a door to a small chamber. He set me down on a bench and crouched in front of me, his hands still on my arms. What were you thinking, he said, and now the anger was back in his voice. You could have killed yourself. Breaking a bond like that without preparation, without a ritual, you could have stopped your own heart. His eyes were blazing gold again, and I could see his wolf pushing forward. He was barely holding on. I don't care, I said, and I meant it. The pain was already fading to a dull ache, and I could feel the emptiness where the bond used to be. It felt like a missing tooth, like something that should be there but wasn't. You rejected me 3 years ago in front of the entire pack council. You said I wasn't worthy of being your Luna. You said an Omega couldn't stand beside a king. My voice was shaking again, but I didn't stop. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Kael's jaw clenched, and he looked away. For a second, he didn't say anything. Then he stood up and turned his back to me, his hands curling into fists at his sides. I was 23 years old, he said quietly. I had just taken the throne. The council was threatening to remove me if I didn't prove I could lead. They said a weak Luna would make me look weak. They said an Omega mate would destroy the kingdom's confidence in me. He turned back around, and his face was hard now, all the softness gone. I did what I had to do to survive. And I was 18, I shot back. I had just presented. I didn't have a family. I didn't have a pack. You were all I had, and you threw me away like I was nothing. I stood up, even though my legs were still shaking, and I made myself look him in the eye. You survived. Congratulations. But I'm not your backup plan. I'm not the mate you come back to when it's convenient. The door opened, and an older woman in healer's robe stepped in. She looked at me, then at Kael, and her expression went carefully blank. Your Majesty, she said, and her voice was calm and professional. I felt the bond break. The Omega needs rest and suppression herbs, or her wolf will try to rebuild the connection. She glanced at me, and there was something like pity in her eyes. And you need to stay away from her, or the bond will snap back into place whether she wants it to or not. Kael stared at me for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out without another word. The healer gave me bitter tea that made my wolf go quiet, and then she left me alone in the small chamber. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the stone wall and feeling the hollow space in my chest where the bond used to be. I thought breaking it would make me feel free. Instead, I just felt empty. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kael's face when the bond snapped. He'd looked terrified. For just a second, he'd looked like he was losing something he couldn't afford to lose. The door opened again, and I looked up expecting the healer. Instead, it was Davrin, one of Kael's council members. He was older, gray at the temples, and he always smiled too much. He closed the door behind him and looked at me like I was a problem he needed to solve. That was quite a performance, he said, and his voice was smooth and cold. Rejecting the Alpha King in front of the entire court. Very dramatic. Very stupid. I stood up, my heart already pounding. Davrin had been one of the loudest voices 3 years ago, one of the council members who'd pushed Kael to reject me. He'd called me a liability to my face. Get out, I said, but my voice didn't sound strong. It sounded scared. Davrin didn't move. He just kept smiling. You've caused a serious problem, he said, taking a step closer. The king can't have a rejected mate wandering around the capital. It makes him look weak. It makes the crown look unstable. He tilted his head, studying me. The council has decided you need to leave. Tonight. We'll give you money, a travel pass, and you'll go north to the border territories. You'll never come back, and you'll never speak of this again. I felt cold all over. They were exiling me. Not officially, not in a way that would require a trial or a public judgment, but they were throwing me out anyway. You can't do that, I said, but even as I said it, I knew they could. I wasn't part of a pack. I had no family, no allies, no rank. I was just an Omega who'd embarrassed the king. Kael won't let you. Davrin laughed, and it was a soft, cruel sound. The king has more important things to worry about than a broken bond, he said. He has a kingdom to run. He has a council to answer to. And he has a new potential Luna arriving tomorrow, a highborn alpha female from the southern territories. She'll be everything you weren't. He pulled a rolled parchment from his coat and held it out to me. This is your travel pass. Take it and go quietly, or we'll have the guards remove you by force. I stared at the parchment, my mind racing. If I left, I'd have nothing. No home, no future, no way to survive except whatever scraps they gave me. But if I stayed, they'd make my life hell. They'd find a way to punish me for what I'd done. My wolf stirred inside me, still groggy from the herbs, but I could feel her anger rising. She didn't want to run. She wanted to fight. I reached out and took the parchment, and Davron's smile widened. But before he could say anything else, the door slammed open. Kael stood in the doorway, and his eyes were pure gold now, his wolf fully forward. He looked at Davron, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Get away from her," Kael said, and his voice was a growl. Davron stepped back immediately, his hands raised, but he didn't look afraid. He looked annoyed. "Your Majesty," Davron said smoothly, "I was simply delivering the council's decision. The Omega cannot stay in the capital after what she's done. It's a matter of stability." He gestured to the parchment in my hand. "We've made arrangements for her departure. It's for the best." Kael's eyes shifted to me, and I saw something break in his expression. He looked at the parchment, then back at Davron, and his jaw tightened. "The council doesn't make decisions about my mate," he said, and his voice was low and dangerous. "I do." Davron's smile faltered, just for a second. "She's not your mate anymore, Your Majesty. She rejected you. In front of everyone. The bond is broken." Kael took a step into the room, and I felt the pressure of his dominance roll out like a physical force. Davron's wolf submitted immediately, his head dropping, his shoulders curling in. "She's still mine," Kael said, and there was something raw in his voice now, something that sounded like pain. "And no one exiles her without my permission. Get out." Davron hesitated, his eyes flicking between me and Kael. Then he bowed his head and left, closing the door behind him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Kael stood there, his chest rising and falling, his hands still clenched into fists. He looked at me, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. He'd just protected me. He'd just gone against his own counsel for me. But 3 years ago, he'd chosen them over me without a second thought. "Why?" I asked, and my voice came out as a whisper. "Why now? Why not then?" Kael didn't answer right away. He just stood there, staring at me like he was trying to figure out what to say. Finally, he let out a long breath and ran a hand through his hair. "Because I was a coward then," he said. "And I'm trying not to be one now." He turned and walked to the door, but he stopped before he opened it. "You're staying," he said, and it wasn't a request. "I don't care what the council says. You're not leaving." Then he left, and I was alone again, holding the parchment in my shaking hands. I looked down at it, at the official seal and the travel pass that would take me far away from here. And then I tore it in half. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the small chamber, sitting on the bench, feeling my wolf pace restlessly inside me. The suppression herbs were wearing off, and she was getting stronger. She wanted to find Kael. She wanted to rebuild the bond, to fix what I'd broken. But I wouldn't let her. Every time she pushed forward, I shoved her back down, and it felt like fighting myself. By the time morning light started creeping through the narrow window, I was exhausted and my head was pounding. The door opened without a knock, and a young woman stepped in. She was maybe a year or two older than me, with dark hair pulled back in a tight braid and sharp eyes that took in everything at once. She wasn't wearing servant's clothes or guard armor. She was dressed plainly, like someone who didn't want to be noticed. "You're Sera," she said, and it wasn't a question. I stood up slowly, my body tense. "Who are you?" "My name is Lena," she said, closing the door behind her. "I work in the records hall. I keep track of pack bloodlines, mate bonds, council decisions, all the official documents." She reached into her bag and pulled out a leather-bound book, old and worn at the edges. "And I found something you need to see." She set the book down on the bench and opened it to a marked page. The writing was faded, written in the old formal script they used for legal records. This is the official documentation of your presentation 3 years ago. When you turned 18 and your wolf came forward. I stepped closer, looking down at the page. I saw my name, the date, and a string of notes about my Omega status. Nothing I didn't already know. I don't understand, I said. What am I supposed to be looking at? Lena's finger moved down the page and stopped on a line near the bottom. It was a single word, written in different ink, like someone had added it later. The word was recessive. Your Omega status was listed as recessive, Lena said quietly. That means your wolf presented as Omega, but there's other blood in your line. Stronger blood. She flipped to another page, this one showing a complicated family tree with names and lines connecting them. I traced your bloodline back 4 generations. Your great-grandmother was an alpha. A powerful one. She led her own pack before she was killed in the border wars. Lena looked at me, and her expression was serious. Recessive wolves can shift. Under extreme stress or trauma, their wolf can represent. You could become an alpha, Sera. I stared at her, my heart pounding. That wasn't possible. Wolves didn't change rank. You presented once, and that was it for life. You're lying, I said, but my voice shook. That's not how it works. Lena shook her head. It's rare. Maybe 1 in 1,000. But it happens. And the council knows about it. She pulled out another document, this one more recent. It was dated 2 years ago, and it had Davron's signature at the bottom. They tested your blood after Kael rejected you. They wanted to make sure you wouldn't be a problem later. The results came back positive for alpha markers. The room felt like it was spinning. If this was true, if I really could represent as an alpha, then everything changed. The council would see me as a threat. Kael would see me as a threat. An Omega mate was easy to control, easy to dismiss. But an alpha mate, especially one he'd rejected and humiliated, that was dangerous. Why are you telling me this? I asked. What do you want? Lena closed the book and looked me straight in the eye. Because they're planning to kill you, she said, and her voice was flat and cold. The council is meeting today to vote on your execution. They're going to call it treason, rejecting the Alpha King in public. They'll make it legal, make it official, and you'll be dead by sunset. My legs went weak, and I had to grab the edge of the bench to stay upright. Kael wouldn't let them, I said, but even as I said it, I wasn't sure. He protected me last night, but would he go against the entire council? Would he risk his throne for me? The king doesn't get a vote, Lena said. Not on matters of treason. The council has full authority. He can appeal, but that takes days, and they're moving today. She put the book back in her bag and pulled out a small vial filled with dark red liquid. This is extraction oil. It's made from alpha blood and nightshade root. If you drink it, it'll force your wolf forward. It'll trigger the representation if you have the bloodline for it. But it's dangerous. If you don't have enough alpha markers, it'll kill you. I stared at the vial, my hands shaking. This was insane. I could drink it and maybe become an alpha, or I could drink it and die. And if I didn't drink it, the council would execute me anyway. How do I know you're telling the truth? I asked. How do I know this isn't poison? Lena reached into her bag one more time and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. She handed it to me, and I opened it. It was an execution order, signed by 4 council members, including Davron. My name was at the top. The date was today. The time was sunset. You have until the council meets at midday to decide, Lena said. If you drink it and survive, you'll have a chance to fight back. If you don't, you're dead either way. She set the vial down on the bench next to me. I'm sorry. I wish I had better options for you. She turned and left, and the door closed softly behind her. I picked up the vial and held it up to the light. The liquid inside was thick and dark, like blood mixed with ink. My wolf was howling now, sensing the danger, sensing the choice in front of me. I thought about Kael, about the way he'd looked at me last night. I thought about the council, about Davron's smile and his smooth, cruel voice. And I thought about the execution order with my name on it. I uncorked the vial, and I drank it down in one swallow. The pain hit me like a lightning strike. I dropped the vial and it shattered on the stone floor, and then I was on my hands and knees, gasping for air. It felt like my bones were breaking and reshaping, like my blood was boiling inside my veins. My wolf surged forward, stronger than she'd ever been, and I couldn't hold her back anymore. She was changing. I was changing. I could feel the power flooding through me, raw and wild and unstoppable. I don't know how long it lasted. It could have been minutes or hours. But when the pain finally faded, I was lying on the cold floor, drenched in sweat, and everything felt different. I pushed myself up to my knees, and my hands looked the same, but they felt stronger. My senses were sharper. I could hear voices 3 floors above me. I could smell the guards stationed outside the door. And my wolf wasn't cowering anymore. She was standing tall, proud, and absolutely furious. I stood up, and my legs didn't shake. I walked to the small mirror on the wall and looked at myself. My eyes were different. They weren't the soft brown they'd always been. They were gold, bright and burning. Alpha gold. Lena had been right. I'd represented. I was an alpha now. And I had less than 2 hours before the council met to order my execution. I didn't wait. I walked straight to the door, pulled it open, and the 2 guards outside turned to look at me. They both froze. I could see the confusion on their faces, the way their wolves were reacting to me now. They didn't see an Omega anymore. They saw a threat. "Move," I said, and my voice came out deeper, layered with command. Both guards stepped aside without a word. I walked past them and headed straight for the council chamber. The halls were crowded with nobles and officials, all of them whispering and watching me as I passed. I could feel their stares, hear their shock, but I didn't slow down. My wolf was pushing me forward, and I wasn't going to stop until I faced the council. I reached the massive double doors of the council chamber, and the guards there moved to block me. "The council is in session," one of them said. "No one enters without permission." I looked him in the eye, and I let my wolf rise to the surface. My eyes flashed gold, and I felt the dominance roll off me in a wave. The guard's face went pale, and he stepped aside. I shoved the doors open and walked into the chamber. The room went silent. 12 council members sat in a half-circle on raised seats, and Kael stood in the center of the floor, facing them. He was arguing with them, his voice raised, and I could see the frustration on his face. Then he turned and saw me, and his expression went blank with shock. Davron was on his feet immediately. "Guards, remove her," he shouted, but I was already walking forward. 3 guards moved toward me, and I let my wolf out fully. The dominance that poured out of me was so strong that all 3 of them dropped to their knees, their heads bowed, their wolves completely submitted. The council members stared at me, and I could see the fear starting to creep into their faces. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, and my voice echoed through the chamber. "You want to execute me for treason? For rejecting a king who rejected me first?" I turned to look at Davron, and he took a step back. You knew I had alpha blood. You tested me 2 years ago, and you buried the results because you were afraid of what I might become." I pulled the folded execution order from my pocket and held it up. "And now you're trying to kill me before I can become a problem." Kael moved toward me, his eyes wide. "Sera, what happened to you?" he asked, and his voice was shaking. He could feel it too, the change in me, the power that was radiating off me now. I looked at him, and for the first time since I'd walked into this room 3 years ago as a terrified 18-year-old Omega, I felt like we were standing on equal ground. "I became what I was always supposed to be," I said. I turned back to the council, and I let every ounce of anger and pain I'd been carrying for 3 years flood into my voice. "You tried to throw me away. You tried to erase me. But I'm still here. And I'm not an Omega anymore. I took a step forward, and 2 more council members stood up, their hands raised like they were going to call for more guards. If you want to execute me, you're going to have to fight me for it. And I promise you, I won't go down easy. Kael moved to stand beside me, and when he spoke, his voice was hard and cold. If you try to touch her, you go through me first, he said. She's my mate. She's always been my mate. And if this council thinks they can kill her without consequences, you're all fools. He looked at me, and I saw something fierce and possessive burning in his eyes. I rejected you once, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I won't let them take you from me again. Davrin's face twisted with rage. He slammed his hand down on the table in front of him, and his voice came out like a snarl. You can't protect her, Your Majesty. She's committed treason. The law is clear. And now she's used forbidden magic to alter her wolf. That's a crime punishable by death. He looked around at the other council members, his eyes wild. We have to act now, or she'll destroy everything we've built. Kael's wolf came forward, his eyes burning gold, and the dominance that rolled off him was crushing. Every wolf in the room felt it, and half the council members bent under the weight of it. You want to talk about crimes? Kael said, and his voice was deadly quiet. Let's talk about how you ordered an execution without bringing it to me first. Let's talk about how you tested my mate's blood and hid the results. Let's talk about conspiracy and treason. He pulled a rolled parchment from inside his coat and threw it onto the floor in front of Davrin. I found your letters. The ones you sent to the Southern Territories, promising them I'd take an alpha mate and push Sera out. The ones where you accepted bribes in exchange for council votes. Davrin's face went pale. The other council members were staring at him now, and I could see the realization spreading through the room. Kael had known. He'd been investigating them. Those letters are forgeries, Davrin said, but his voice was shaking. You have no proof. Kael smiled, and it was cold and sharp. I have 6 witnesses and your personal seal on every document. You're done. 2 guards stepped forward and grabbed Davrin by the arms. He struggled, shouting threats and accusations, but no one moved to help him. The other council members who'd signed my execution order were standing now, backing away from their seats, their faces pale with fear. Kael looked at each of them in turn. Anyone who signed that execution order is removed from this council effective immediately, he said. You'll be investigated for conspiracy. If you're found guilty, you'll face the same punishment you tried to give her. The chamber erupted in noise, council members shouting, some trying to defend themselves, others calling for order. But I wasn't listening to them anymore. I was watching Kael. He'd just dismantled half his council in front of everyone. He'd chosen me over them, over the stability they claimed to represent. And he'd done it publicly, in a way that couldn't be undone. He turned to me, and the hardness in his face softened just a little. I should have done this 3 years ago, he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. I should have fought for you then. I'm sorry I didn't. I looked at him, this Alpha King who'd broken my heart and then spent 3 years regretting it. My wolf was still angry, still hurt, but she wasn't howling anymore. She was watching him, waiting to see what he'd do next. Sorry doesn't fix what you did, I said, and my voice was steady now. Sorry doesn't give me back the 3 years I spent thinking I wasn't good enough. Kael nodded slowly, and I saw the pain flash across his face. I know, he said. And I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to stay. Let me prove I'm different now. Let me prove you were always good enough. The remaining council members were silent now, all of them watching us. I could feel the weight of their stares, the judgment, the fear. But I didn't care anymore. I'd faced death today. I'd become something stronger. And I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel small ever again. I'll stay, I said, and Kael's eyes widened with relief. But not as your hidden mate. Not as someone you're ashamed of. If I stay as your equal. As your Luna. In front of everyone. Kael didn't hesitate. He dropped to one knee right there in the council chamber, in front of everyone, and he took my hand. Then be my Luna, he said, and his voice carried through the entire room. Be my mate. Be my equal. And I swear on my life, I will never reject you again. The bond between us flickered, faint and damaged but still there. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't push it away. 3 months later, I stood on the balcony of the royal chambers and looked out over the capital. The city was quieter now, calmer, and the tension that had been hanging over everything when I first rejected Kael was finally starting to lift. The new council members had been chosen, voted in by the pack leaders from every territory. Davrin and the others who'd conspired against me were gone, exiled to the northern wastelands where they couldn't hurt anyone else. And I was still here. Still standing. Kael came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. The bond between us was fully healed now, stronger than it had been before. We'd completed the mating ritual 2 weeks ago, in front of the entire kingdom, and I'd worn the Luna's crown for the first time. It was heavy, but I was strong enough to carry it. What are you thinking about? He asked, his voice low and warm against my ear. I'm thinking about how different everything is, I said, leaning back into him. 3 months ago, I was ready to leave. I was ready to disappear and never come back. I turned in his arms so I could look up at him. And now I'm the Luna. I'm helping you rebuild the council. I'm actually making decisions that matter. It still felt strange sometimes, having that kind of power, but I was learning. And the pack was learning to respect me, not because I was Kael's mate, but because I'd earned it. Kael smiled, and it was the real smile, the one that made him look younger and less like a king carrying the weight of the world. You're better at it than I ever was, he said. The new council actually listens to you. They're terrified of you, but they listen. He was joking, but there was truth in it. My alpha wolf made me a force they couldn't ignore, and I wasn't afraid to use that power when I needed to. They should be terrified, I said, and I let a little bit of my wolf show in my eyes. I fought too hard to get here to let anyone take it away. Kael's expression turned serious, and he cupped my face in his hands. I'll never let that happen, he said. I'll never let anyone hurt you again. I promise. I believed him. Not because he was perfect, not because he hadn't made mistakes, but because he'd proven it. He'd chosen me over his council, over his throne, over everything. And he kept choosing me, every single day. I know, I said, and I kissed him, slow and deep, letting the bond hum between us. When I pulled back, I smiled. But if you ever reject me again, I'll do a lot worse than just break the bond. Kael laughed, and the sound echoed out over the city. Noted, he said. I'll keep that in mind. And together, we stood there and watched the sun set over our kingdom.